A likely tale. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here this morning. You just need to speak into it. Okay, nothing to say. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here this morning. It's not cold. I was really expecting it to be cold, and it's quite nice. And thank you to Luke Sheehy, who a Melbourne boy. Did you come down from Canberra?
No.
Okay.
Slept in my own bed last night in Melbourne.
That'd be a pretty rare occurrence for you, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for a Sunday night.
I meant in your own bed. There's a line in Sweeney Todd's musical, in Stephen Sondheim's musical, Sweeney Todd, that demons are prowling everywhere. And the song is about someone who is there to protect us all from the demons. This morning, that's him. And that's him, the organisation he leads. Universities Australia has stood up this year in a way that I've never seen before. It's extraordinary. It's recognised challenges, profound challenges politically and socially, right across the spectrum, and it's starting to answer them and to speak up for the sector. Inevitably, an organisation like UA's job is to talk to the bureaucrats, is to make the case for you, make the case for funding for you, for jobs that you can actually do and that you can do well to support the system, to support the country. But all of a sudden, you are now in the political game to an extent you've never been in my lifetime before. It is an extraordinary situation you face. I know UA has been working hard right through the Accord process to balance the needs, to reform teaching, learning and funding, but also to protect the system politically. And now they've gone public. A couple of months ago, they spoke up on Texas intervention in the choosing of a new chancellor for ANU. It was Universities Australia and the outgoing Chancellor of the University of Queensland, Peter Varghese, who led the charge. Most of the lobby stayed quiet. It's a pretty challenging thing to do, to take on TEXA with the full backing of the Minister. And this morning, Luke Sheehy's got a speech that I've read that goes beyond that in a broader sense to talk about the challenges that your leaders, you, must all face. And you must face them not for the usual reasons of down the track these things may happen. It's now happening now. Politically, it's going to be very difficult, whoever wins the next election. The university sector has social challenges that I've never seen before. Luke clearly is too young to have seen them before, but he knows that they're coming. Sir, tell us about it.
Yes, thanks. All right, now I'll give you my set piece speech, but thank you, Stephen. Can you all hear me? Yes, you can. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Stephen, for that introduction. And can I acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with us today. And a relatively warm good morning for midwinter. It was the winter solstice yesterday, so we can look forward to longer days and perhaps brighter days, Stephen. Thank you to Tim and Stephen for inviting me here to Future Campus. And Tim and I were just reflecting, I think your first Future Campus event was with ATN, so which we co-hosted. So it's nice to see us both maturing in our roles, although I do long for those simpler days sometimes, Tim. The work you do obviously creates something our sector doesn't always give itself enough time for. Space to think, space to challenge assumptions, and space to have honest conversations about where higher education is heading next. Those conversations matter, especially now. Can I also say how great it is to be in Melbourne, my hometown, and a city that is home to some of Australia's leading universities. In fact, I was so obsessed with them, I went to 3 of them myself. Institutions that have helped shape the state's economy, culture, and global reputation for now generations. But it's also fitting we're having this conversation here, because Victorian universities have spent much of the past year at the centre of a national conversation about accountability, governance, and public trust. From parliamentary inquiries to media scrutiny, Universities have found themselves under the microscope. And while much of the debate has focused on governance, regulation and oversight, I think it points to something bigger: leadership. Now, let me be clear. Governance matters, policy matters, funding matters, regulation matters. In fact, all of those issues are becoming increasingly important. Good governance is essential. But governance alone won't determine whether universities succeed in the decade ahead. Leadership will. Because ultimately, how institutions navigate these challenges comes down to leadership. Leadership determines whether organisations are shaped by change or whether they help shape it, whether they retreat from scrutiny or engage in it, whether they accept the status quo or challenge it. And right now, the leadership task facing Australian universities is changing and fast. The environment our universities operate in today looks very different from the one many of us entered. There is more scrutiny, more regulation, more political contestability, more public debate, more expectations, and in many cases, fewer resources. Universities are increasingly being asked to do more with less, educate a larger and more diverse student population, drive productivity, power innovation, support sovereign capability, help deliver the clean energy transition, build the workforce Australia needs, strengthen communities, and all while navigating financial pressures, workforce challenges, and growing public scrutiny. The mission hasn't changed, but the environment has. And when the environment changes, leadership must evolve with it. Let me be clear, university leadership has never been a job for the faint-hearted. Leaders have always been required to make difficult decisions, to manage competing priorities, to navigate change, and to guide institutions through uncertainty. But the pace of change is accelerating. Expectations are rising, the operating environment is becoming more contested, and the demands on leaders are broader than ever before. Today's leaders need a broader toolkit. They need to be communicators, advocates, coalition builders, change makers. They need to navigate government and public policy. They need to engage industry and communities. They need to build trust in an era where trust in institutions is under pressure. And increasingly, they need to lead through disruption rather than simply respond to it, because disruption is no longer the exception. Universities can no longer afford to lead from behind their gates, not when public confidence matters, not when policy decisions increasingly shape our operating environment, and not when the value of higher education is being contested in parts of the public debate. We cannot assume people understand what universities do or why they matter. We have to explain it, demonstrate it, and tell that story every single day. Because if universities don't tell their story, someone else will tell it for them. And history suggests we may not always like the version they tell. That brings me to another leadership quality I think is becoming increasingly important: courage. Not courage in the dramatic sense, but courage in the everyday decisions leaders make. The courage to challenge assumptions, the courage to embrace change, the courage to make difficult decisions. And yes, sometimes the courage to call out bad policy. Universities should be constructive partners of government. They should engage in good faith. They should bring solutions to the table. At Universities Australia, that's exactly how we approach our advocacy. But partnership does not mean silence. The strongest relationships are not built on agreement, but they're built on honesty. When governments get it right, we should say so. When governments make decisions that strengthen Australia's universities, students, and research system, we should support them. But when policies risk undermining students, research capability, or Australia's future prosperity, leaders have a responsibility to say so, respectfully, constructively, but clearly. Universities have an obligation not only to their institutions, but to the students they serve and the nation they help build. That means sometimes speaking uncomfortable truths, sometimes challenging the prevailing narrative, sometimes standing up and saying, this won't work. Not because it's politically convenient, but because it's the right thing to do. Leadership demands nothing less. And right now, there are no shortages of examples. Take the Job Ready Graduates package. Universities Australia has been clear. The policy is not working as intended. It has shifted costs onto students. It's removed billions of dollars from the sector, and it's failed to meaningfully change student behaviour. 5 years on, the problem remains. And despite near universal acknowledgement that it isn't working, we're yet to replace it. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. If we genuinely believe Australia needs more graduates, if we genuinely believe we need to reach the Accord's ambition of 80% tertiary attainment by 2050, if we genuinely believe higher education is central to productivity, workforce participation and national prosperity, then we need funding settings that support these goals, not undermine them. That's why Universities Australia continues to call for the Job Ready Graduates funding to be replaced. And frankly, this is a fight the entire sector should get behind. Not because it's about universities, because it's about students. It's about quality, it's about access, and it's about ensuring more Australians can benefit from higher education, not fewer. This is exactly where leadership matters. Because leadership is not simply about managing within the policy environment we inherit. Sometimes it's about changing it. Sometimes it's about building the case for something better. And sometimes it's about standing together and clearly saying, this isn't working. The same principle applies to international education and international students. Australia has spent decades building one of the world's great international education sectors. Yet over the past 2 years, we've seen policy instability, shifting signals, and growing uncertainty. Leadership means having the confidence to say that stability and certainty matter, that policy settings should be guided by evidence, not headlines, and that one of Australia's greatest national assets deserves a long-term strategy, not short-term fixes. Universities should never be afraid to make the case for a sector that contributes $55 billion to the economy, supports hundreds of thousands of jobs, and remains one of Australia's most important strategic assets. Nor should we be afraid to argue for a greater investment in research and development when Australia's productivity challenge is becoming more acute. Universities have a perspective that matters and a responsibility to contribute, and leaders should never be afraid to make that case. But leadership isn't only about speaking up when policies are wrong. It's also about resisting the temptation to accept that every problem requires yet another layer of process. At the same time, universities face another challenge, the steady growth of regulation and compliance. Now let me be clear. Good governance matters, accountability matters, and public confidence matters. Universities should be transparent, responsible, and well-governed. But every new reporting requirement, every new compliance obligation, every new regulatory framework takes something away. Time, resources, leadership attention, energy that could otherwise be directed towards students, researchers, and the communities we serve. And over time, there is a risk. The risk is simply that regulation grows. The risk is that institutions begin to internalise it, that caution becomes culture, that compliance becomes the organising principle, that ambition gives way to risk management, that we stop asking whether the process actually improves outcomes and simply accept that more regulation is the price of legitimacy. Universities should never lose sight of what they exist to do. They exist to educate, to discover, to innovate, to solve problems, to challenge ideas, to advance knowledge. They are not compliance organisations. And leaders must ensure they never become one, because Australia needs universities that are ambitious, confident and prepared to lead. Accountability should strengthen universities, not suffocate them. The good news is our sector has no shortage of talented leaders, but leadership cannot sit solely with Vice-Chancellors and executive teams. The institutions that thrive over the next decade will be those that build leadership capability at every level, among academic leaders, professional staff, emerging leaders, future Vice-Chancellors, because the challenge facing universities are simply too large and too complex to be carried out by a handful of people at the top. Leadership must be distributed, developed and nurtured across the institution. As we look ahead, I believe universities are entering one of the most consequential decades in our country's history. The next decade will test us in ways we can't yet fully anticipate. Artificial intelligence will reshape how we teach, learn and work. Geopolitical uncertainty will continue to challenge old assumptions. New industries will emerge, others will disappear. The pace of change will only accelerate. But one thing is certain: Australia's productivity challenge cannot be solved without universities. Australia's skills challenge cannot be solved without universities and TAFEs. Australia's innovation challenge cannot be solved without universities. Australia's research challenge cannot be solved without universities. And many of Australia's greatest national opportunities will depend on the capability, knowledge and talent universities help create. That should give us confidence. And despite all the challenges we face, universities remain one of Australia's greatest national assets. They educate the future workforce, they drive research and innovation, and they anchor communities across the nation. The challenge for leaders is not whether universities matter, they do. The challenge is ensuring our leadership evolves to meet the moment, to navigate complexity, to embrace change, to build trust, to tell our story, to advocate when necessary, and lead with both conviction and courage. Because the future of Australian higher education won't be shaped by legislation alone, or funding formulas or regulatory frameworks. It will be shaped by leaders. Leaders prepared to adapt, leaders prepared to engage, leaders prepared to speak up when it matters, and leaders prepared to shape the future rather than simply respond to it. Because the stakes are too high for anything less. The future of our institutions, the future of our students, and in many respects, the future of our nation. Thank you very much.
To the barricades. Questions? Gentleman in the middle, lady up the back to follow.
Thank you. Warren Bemington, Centre of Studies on Higher Education here. This is not so much a question as applause and a comment. I'd agree with absolutely everything you just said, and I think this is an enormously important speech, and I was glad to see Matchett give it some press this morning. I hope it gets very wide dissemination. But my comment was that this is a very dramatic change for the behaviour of Vice-Chancellors. When I was a Vice-Chancellor, someone who spoke out against state or federal policy did so often with the mute silence of their colleagues, and although a Premier or a Minister of Education continued to be gracious to you, they found all kinds of ways behind the scenes to undermine your institution and take their revenge. So I was simply going to say that I think it's enormously important for you to galvanise the members of Universities Australia to act more as a group and to not leave isolated someone who does precisely what you have to say. And I wish you really the very best with this. It would transform the discourse.
Well, thanks, Warren, for not kicking me out of the Bachelor of Music in the late 90s, because I was very naughty, but thank you very much. And Look, I'll just make a few comments. I'm acknowledging that I've got a board member here and Deputy Chair, and Renee Leon. We are working incredibly hard in the collective, I think, to make our voice known, and I think there are incredibly strong leaders across the 38 that we have, and I think we all now collectively recognise that if we don't make our presence felt and make it known in the public rather than just in private hallways of Parliament House, then we're on a hiding to nothing, because every single moment, every single issue that's on the front page of the Australian, we get a frankly inadequate response from, but it's a regulatory intervention. We just cannot accept it anymore. And I think pretty much, I think it was the second month in my job here at UA that we recognised that international students was going to be, that we're going to have the fight of our lives. And I recognised the strengths of the UA board and the chair at the time, David Lloyd, for letting us go into the front and into the fire on behalf of the members, because I think that was tremendously important. And frankly, actually it buys you strength buys you some respect in the political world. So I think passivity is the thing, or accepting things for too long, and to Stephen's point earlier, is where you get caught up as being seen ineffective, or being able to have things done to you, not with you. So thanks very much, and thanks for letting me graduate.
Tim, lady top left.
Hi Luke, Michelle Gillespie from Workday now, formerly worked with you.
And thanks for not sacking me at 2 universities as well. There's all my friends are in the room.
I know, Luke and I used to work together at Melbourne University many years ago. I have got a question. So I am the proud parent at the moment of 3 children, all somewhere in the journey of university and struggling with the impact of job ready graduates. So my eldest daughter just tried to buy a house and had to run to the bank of mum and dad when their HECS debt was incorporated into the loan that they were trying to apply for, which meant that they couldn't get the money that they thought they were going to, and mum and dad had to come to the rescue to make sure that they actually were able to get their house. She's 28, by the way. My next daughter is 22. She is currently in the process of doing a Bachelor of Business that is costing her $52,000, which means that when she goes to buy a house, she's going to have a debt of $52,000. My question really, I guess, is these are real stories that are impacting our young people today in a really tangible way. How do we get these stories out there so that it can have that sort of impact of how it's actually genuinely affecting the people that we love and are trying to make the world better for, but keep putting barriers in their way?
I know it's early and it's a Monday morning, but I will try not to be too provocative, but I'll say a couple of things. One is the general public doesn't recognise that the fees are set by the Commonwealth Government via legislation, not by universities. That is a huge problem we have, and we've picked that up in our research. But the expense of university, particularly the debate we've had in the last couple of years around HECS, and the wildly popular, somewhat kind of populist 20% HECS discount at the last election that bought Labor a swathe of votes, particularly in the inner city and some of the other more younger parts of the country. I have said regularly, much to the irritation of my media team in the public, that I remember a moment when the Labor Party campaigned against $100,000 degrees. When does it get too much? Now, 52,000. It'll be 57,000 for a Band 1 student in law, economics, or humanities from this year on. So $60,000 debts does not cut it with the public, and then we have this kind of strange dichotomy where students are absolutely ganked at $60,000, and our universities continue to have nearly $1 billion ripped out of it each and every year. Here's the political challenge on that, though. The Greens offered a solution, which is to knock off the high fee amounts for arts and humanities without topping up the subsidy to the institutions. And the net effect would have been a $1.3 billion hit on the university sector each and every year, compounding. And it was kind of lost on them. And here's our challenge. Institutions aren't going to be backed by the political class, but students will be. We need to make sure that the idea of a good classroom, a good university experience that actually has classrooms that aren't falling down is part of that proposition that we put. And then finally, wouldn't it be lovely as we get towards the next election that our union, our students and our university sector stand hand in hand and fight for a better funding deal for our universities as well as fairer fees for our students, like we've seen in the school education system. The leadership of Karina Haythorpe and the AEU around Argiva Gonski was tremendous work. That's a challenge that I'm putting to the NTU and the NUS. I'd like to stand up with them as we get to the next election, all together in unity.
Hear, hear.
Sorry about the train, thank you. Look, it's been a great speech, thank you. I'm Joelle, I'm from the ANU. You mentioned something in your speech about developing the leadership capability across the board and not tying it to the executive tier at this moment. In your diverse experience, how do you actually get the buy-ins from the university executives to let go of that and allow that trickle-down effect to start building in?
It's a good point. And look, at Universities Australia, obviously my main focus is working with the Vice-Chancellors. We used to be called the Australian Vice-Chancellors Committee, so there's a little bit of a hangover on that. But we do have a role, and as a long-suffering professional staff member in the university sector, I think it is important that we develop leadership capability right across the spectrum. The thing that I didn't touch on my speech, which I think I would like to have at least acknowledged, is certainly the development of Indigenous leadership as well. And we are really lucky in Australia's university system that we have tremendous Indigenous leadership. I draw your attention to the speech that Professor Michelle Trudgett gave at the start of our Solutions Summit, Higher Education in Focus Day. We are standing at the doorway of an Indigenous Vice-Chancellor. That's really important, and I don't want that to be unrecognised. But certainly I think we want to make sure that we develop people and capability right across our universities, and recognising that not every expert researcher wants to run a faculty, and not every excellent person that looks after students wants to then ultimately be a faculty general manager or a chief operating officer. So it's about ensuring that people have personal job satisfaction and growth within the jobs that they're doing currently. And that comes down to a whole range of things. But one thing that we could do, and back to my point, is we could have much more job security and certainty if we fix the funding crisis in universities, and we work together with the unions and we work together with community partners and take it to the government. It is unacceptable that a Labor government has allowed Scott Morrison's funding to continue 2 elections in a row. And we need to remind them of that each and every day. Doesn't matter if they come up with another 20% HEX discount, because they're going to need to, right? And it's not going to fix casualisation rates, it's not going to fix infrastructure demands, it's not going to fix the fact that we've got enterprise costs going up more than our funding base is going up. We've got to fix that so we can invest in our people, so our people can do their job to invest in the nation.
Lady in the front.
Sam, CEO at ColArts, the Australian College of the Arts. Hi, Luke. I think I love the talk of ambition, but I think sometimes it needs to be matched with the humility of having gotten some things wrong. And I wonder if what got us here won't get us there, or maybe whoever got us here won't get us there. And it is time for new leaders to succeed in the sector. When we look at great examples of innovation or disruption overseas, they're often not led by a traditional vice-chancellor type. And so what do you think we can do to liberate more models of leadership on the assumption that universities are literally littered with brilliance and that the solution to almost everything is already there? How do we ensure the right people rise?
I'm not going to give you a perfect answer, but I'm going to give you an observation which I think goes to that, right? I think is portability and permeability with other sectors, right? So we have former cabinet ministers leading universities now, former departmental secretaries leading universities. We have that works tremendously well in the US, I think. You see people that have an experience of government, and then they might move into the university sector, and then often will move into industry as well. we're very rigid in Australia. There's a kind of natural conservatism about the type of people, and that's not just the leaders, right? It's about in our research staff and our professional staff as well. You know, you're just on one lane, and that's where you're supposed to stick. Government would be better served if they had more people that knew about universities working in ATEC and the Department of Ed, and we'd be better off if we had more people that worked in government and industry coming in and out of our universities. So we should celebrate when we do that. You know, Martin Bean came from an unconventional background when he arrived here. That it works and it brings different perspectives. So I'm a big fan of that, and we should see more of it. I work a lot with the business community. I'd like to see more businesses, you know, recognise that we are a sector and we've got strengths in our people, and that we should have a bit more permeability, and not just limited to the big four consultancies, because that's not where we actually want to be. We want to actually have people with different perspectives. And that's about making our own luck. So that's my one observation. I think that could help. And you're absolutely right. We should have people, the diversity of our leadership should reflect modern Australia. We're pretty good at it. We should self-flagellate all the time. But we, as public institutions, should be a shining leading example of that as well.
Gentleman in the middle.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thanks very much, Luke. My name's James Green. I really enjoyed your remarks. I think they're perfectly suited to the moment that we're in. I think that some of the most persuasive arguments and compelling stories that we can tell actually aren't going to be told by the university sector. They're going to be told by our peers and partners and colleagues and students that can more persuasively put that argument. I'm just curious, where do you see this support coming from, and perhaps why is it that UA has been so notably courageous, perhaps in a void when perhaps others who might have seen the strength of the arguments might have spoken in support too?
I think about this a lot, and I think about the fact that we do need champions, like you see in many other sectors. We have more than 5 million alumni in our institutions, and we don't activate them nearly as quickly and agilely as they do in the US. And I just reflect on that. I mean, we're obviously kind of have a very much focus on activating our alumni to support their peers and do careers support, and then ultimately to donate to our institutions. We've got to think about that. That is our greatest weapon. And, the millions of students that have come and chosen Australia as their destination for a world-class education and then gone home into the region particularly, that's a big untapped resource. And, frankly, government says, you should mandate alumni discussions. And that's at an institutional level. But we can certainly share practice around that and learn from what's happening in other jurisdictions, which I think they do tremendously well. The risk is obviously that you activate a kind of traditionally more progressive cohort on progressive issues, which we see in the US, so we get labelled as part of the cosmopolitan chattering class corner. So that there's a challenge in that. And then the other thing I think particularly is our friends in the business community who have been tremendously supportive, particularly on international student issues. And not just the way you'd think it, like that we need international students to make the beds and pull the beers. They've been much more nuanced and sophisticated about it, and I've sat with key people from hospitality and tourism, the Property Council, the Business Council, not so much the Australian Industry Group, but we'll continue to chip away at them, on the importance of international students to our skill base, to our economic base, etc. It is, regretfully, or just a reality, it's not regret, it's just a reality, that captains of industry will make the case for us in a more compelling way to big decision makers. But then we've got to untap the great Australian populational issue. Many, many Australians don't have a day-to-day interaction with the university. So, and I talked about this when I gave a press club speech, it's Main Street Australia. If you're a regular wage earner in Australia and you walk down the street, there's a pharmacist giving you your prescription, you go to the doctor, your kids are taught by university educated teachers, the people fixing the roads, hopefully in Victoria they giddy up on that because there's a lot of potholes, are engineers or quantity surveyors. University educated people, and research touches everyone's lives. That's why we ran a campaign that says universities matter. Do I have the money to keep running it? No. So I need to think of creative ways to keep that conversation. The risk is you create these divides, right? And I don't need to draw your attention to the US because everyone knows it. Same thing, the fracturing of the political cohorts. The great divide now is educational attainment. We need to make sure that our conversations are not done at people, but they're done with people, but they're also done with advocates. Most people in Australia wouldn't recognise how a university system supports their quality of life. But we can't just say, well, you know, we can't talk at them. It's got to be done in a way that's sophisticated. Traditionally, university peak bodies and vice chancellors avoid, well, not all of them, but we often avoid talkback radio and areas of FM radio and places that we obviously, you know, I don't open up, you know, the Herald Sun every morning, but there are a lot of people that do, and we've got to talk to those people in a way that's not condescending, that's inclusive.
One more? Lady.
Hi Luke, my name is Pauline Ross. I'm Director of Academic Leadership at the University of Sydney. Speaking a bit later today, I so enjoyed your talk. It was a relief to hear some things that you said, and that brings me to my question, in that I think there's fundamentally I'm an academic, and I often sense the tension there is between academic leadership and an academic like me teaching students which have classes of 3,200 at the moment. How do you think we should bring academics to your agenda and with us to make a better university education sector? I mean, at the moment, the strategy to me seems to be we'll regulate the academics. And from my last count, there were 36 different regulatory academic excellence frameworks populating universities, and surprisingly, each one of them is quite different. So there's attempts to regulate academics through these academic excellence frameworks. Good luck if you change institutions, you've got to learn another. But my question, as I said, come back to it, is how do we bring the academics with us in a positive manner, in a positive way, to your agenda?
It would be really helpful if the conversation across our natural coalition of supporters was supportive about having strong institutions to support our people. And I think there's a lot of populist arguments out there at the moment that say every problem in the university sector is to do with leadership, and it's not to do with the fundamentals. Now, I'm not to dismiss that there has been poor leadership in universities. There's poor leadership in a whole range of organisations and institutions. I don't want to be flippant about that. But it is important that I think, bring some more sector unity and perspective, and so we work together, we listen to one another, but we also understand the fundamentals. I've been in a room with many people in our university sector that think that the only issue that needs solving, and I'm not saying that this is you or your academics at the University of Sydney, but they think the only thing that needs solving in the university sector is Vice-Chancellor salaries. Now, great. I mean, if all the Vice-Chancellors work for free, it pays for a very small research centre for a few years, right? We've got to have a unity ticket on what are the fundamentals, and then I think the conversation can flow. So what I'm actually trying to say is that I think there's a lot of fracturing in us versus them in the university sector, rightly and wrongly. So I don't want to diminish people's concerns. I think as well with academics, and as I come back to my earlier point as well, as a long-standing and sometimes suffering professional staff member, we've got to make sure that we respect one another in those two big cohorts across the university sector. Professional staff don't have a 40-40-20 model, and they get 4 weeks annual leave, maybe 5 if they get the Christmas shutdown, but they come in. Many of our support staff run our institutions. I think about this institution during COVID. So, people had to come in to look after the animals that were here, to keep the boilers going so that things didn't freeze. We should be more respectful about all types of workers in our system as well. And then recognise that academics have incredible workloads as well. As we've had this insatiable need for growth because of the distorted funding model, there is a lot more pressure on academics. So I think everyone's under pressure, everyone wants someone to blame, and everyone's a bit grumpy. And I think we've got to come together and work on a collective vision of how do we fix the joint.
Luke Sheehy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
couple of minutes break and we'll start again with Liz.